To you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Technology. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Technology, where we discuss the technology news that's important to you from a uniquely Catholic point of view. And joining me today on the panel are Thomas and Herho. Hey, Thomas.
Hey, Dom.
And Jack Berzini. Hi, Jack.
Hey, Dom.
Let's get right into it, because we got a lot to talk about here, and this is a very good topic, and I forget which of us brought it up, but it's as soon as I heard it, I said, this is a great topic. And we're going to be talking today about how to set up your home network safely, securely, efficiently, all those other lees, and so that we're using our technology to our best advantage to serve us. And so that's what we're getting into. You may have a home network already. You probably, in fact, if you're listening to this, I'm almost certain you do. You probably have an internet provider that brings a cable of some sort into your home, or a satellite dish on your roof, or something like that, and that connects to a device that's like a modem, and that may or may not either include inside the same box or outside it another box called a router. So, guys, basically, what is the hardware that we're talking about? What are we talking about when we talk about a network? What's the hardware?
Well, to start off, basically what you're going to have is, most of the time, if you're subscribing to your standard internet nowadays, you're going to be offered a modem and router all in one box by your ISP. And essentially what that is the modem is the device that brings in all the internet from a wired connection, and then the router is the part that's going to be broadcasting that out over Wi-Fi throughout your house. And my recommendation is you purchase your own modem and you purchase your own router separately from your ISP. That way you don't have to pay the leasing fees that they're going to add on to your subscription. I know a lot of people, when you're signing up, they push really hard to get you to pick up their systems. They'll call like in-home Wi-Fi, and it'll be an all-in-one box, and you're going to end up paying like $15 to $30 extra per month just to lease their hardware. And usually it's hardware that's at least a year out of date, if not more. And with a little bit of research, you can get your own hardware. It's going to be probably $150 for your modem up front, and then $150 to $300 depending on what Wi-Fi router package you're going with. But it's going to be a better investment if you buy your hardware separately from your ISP.
And it's going to pay for itself in a year.
Right.
So, yeah, don't you're upfronting that cost a little bit, but you're in control of it, and it's a better piece of equipment.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I think about, you guys are gonna cringe when you hear this. I've had my current ISP for, maybe 10 years. I think I have the same modem that they gave me that, and so I probably need to get a new modem now. I think the topic of how to choose a modem, maybe we'll segregate that and come back to that on another episode, just because that's a big conversation in and of itself. DOCSIS and all that sort of thing. And you got to make sure you get the right modem that works with your internet provider and that sort of thing. So we want to...
I was going to say, that's the biggest issue. You need to call your ISP first and say, hey, what works with your stuff?
Right. And then you buy it. let's put that aside for the moment and move a little further in. Why would we want to separate the router and the modem? What benefit of that is there in that?
It just has to do with, if one piece of hardware fails, you're not going to lose everything all at once. If your router dies, you can replace that and not replace your modem, and vice versa. Okay. You also get more flexibility. Like if you buy a modem, I feel like we're at a point with technology now where you can buy a modem and it's going to be good for, like you said, probably a decade, but you might want to change your Wi-Fi routers out more than that. Mm-hmm. And so that way you don't have to get a whole new system every time you want to change one part of that.
Right.
And to be fair, if you don't want to bother with the modem, you want to just get the modem from your provider and add your own Wi-Fi router, you can do that. There are ways to just shut off the router portion of your combined box, which is what I normally do.
Yes.
Just because our ISP will not allow me to use my own modem. They are very stodgy about that. So they won't let me do it. So I have to use their router, but then I just shut off the Wi-Fi portion of the router and connect my own Wi-Fi the Wi-Fi portion of the modem and use my own Wi-Fi router from there.
One of the benefits of turning off the Wi-Fi that they give you, the Wi-Fi built into the modem, is some ISPs will also have public hotspots running off of your modem, and they tell you it doesn't affect your bandwidth, or the people who are using it can't get into your network. But frankly, I'm paying for this service. I don't want other people using it. I just feel better turning that off and use somebody else's modem for that sort of thing. All right, so I've got my modem. We'll talk about, we'll come back to that later. We got my router, a Wi-Fi router. Now, not all routers aren't just Wi-Fi, right? I could run a wire out of the back of it and run Ethernet in, which is what I do. Here I use both the Wi-Fi, my phones and my laptops and iPads and that sort of thing. But I run a cable. Actually, I run it to a switch, but that's outside our discussion. But I run it into the back of my iMac because I want higher speed, because that's a big difference, right? The speed you get over Ethernet is much higher than you're going to get over Wi-Fi, correct?
Yes,
absolutely.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have critical pieces of equipment that I need on a solid, stable connection that's reliable and fast. And so, I run a server that's a gaming server that I have friends from around the world that connect to. And that's definitely hardwired into my router and my computer. Also, I just like to have it on that higher speed access.
Yeah, and I think that goes into the whole when you're planning out how you're going to be laying out your network, you want to make sure you have things like your backup system, if you have one, or like a rated array of hard drives for storing all your media. You want all that to be in the same room with your modem and router so they can all be wired in. And then the Wi-Fi is going to be for things like your phones and your iPads and your laptops, where you want to have decent speeds, but you're not necessarily worried about latency to a high degree or the reliability of the connection like 24/7.
Yeah, one of the things to think about too is when you're bringing internet into your house, where you want that to come. Because if you're going to be using Wi-Fi, you want to make sure that Wi-Fi reaches the far corners. And we can talk about mesh and other things later. But you want to think about this. What room do I want my Wi-Fi router to be in? And ideally, you want it to be in as central a location as possible. I know that some people have, especially like in new build construction, they have network closets, which is a new thing in homes, but companies have all the time. And so it's centrally located in the house so that there's equal distance from the router out to all the parts of the property. That might be a little extravagant, but it's worth thinking about. Where's is it most important for you to have a strong signal? Like I have mine, the guys can see on my my camera here, right above my head, right here above my head is my router. Right behind me, high speed, and it's a short distance to the by wire, all that sort of stuff. So think about where in the house you want it. Ideally, is it better to have it higher up?
In my experience, I know that this is mostly anecdotal, but in my experience, if you are in a 2-story house or more, you want it to have it at least be on the second floor and as central as possible, because that way it's going to be radiating out towards the different rooms in the house. And in general, when you're setting up a Wi-Fi router, it's going to be closer to the ground. Then you're not going to be like putting it up like 11 feet high in your room.
Right.
And so if you're on a ground level room and you put it down in the corner, a lot of that the radiation out from the signal is going to be going into the ground. So you want to be on a second floor if you have that option.
Right. And probably not a basement, because
no, it's
definitely not a basement. And pay attention to your walls too. This is one thing that I think a lot of people forget. If you have concrete walls, or if you have thick walls, or walls that have metal lining in them,
old walls, old houses are really bad.
Man, that's our house. Our house is like all cement cinder blocks. So because we're Florida, right? So you gotta avoid the hurricanes. But it's death for any kind of electronic signal.
Right.
Also, make sure when you're setting it up that if you have fluorescent lighting in your house and you have a lot of conduit, you don't want to put your routers really close to that, because all that electronic interference is really going to cut down on your signal strength. I've had that where I work. We've had an issue with that when we're putting in the access points for our routers, trying to figure out the best spot in the ceiling to put them in so they're not being interfered by the fluorescent lights and the AC conduit.
Yep. Yeah, one of the things, speaking of like Thomas, you were saying, I used to live in a rectory that was over 100 years old. I mean, at this point, it's I think 150 years old, and so it had all the metal lathe in the walls that the horsehair plaster was attaching to, and I couldn't get a signal like outside my room.
Right.
I mean, it was like a Faraday cage for
exactly.
Wi-Fi.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, it is. So if you live in an old house, it's something to think about. If that hasn't been renovated, that's another thing to think about. You might actually need to do Ethernet and that sort of thing.
Now, I will say, you joke about having a rack at home, but there is a whole subreddit dedicated to it. It's called Home Lab, and it's all about people that have created their rack setup at home. And most of them are system architects, and they just, they see the problems with the stuff that's going on at home, and they want to put it together that way.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to go check out that subreddit, but it might be dangerous.
I will also say, if you're intimidated by running Ethernet cable in your house, it's really not as bad as you think it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not any sort of certified electrician at all, and I've wired up an entire building with Ethernet, and it's really not that hard to do. So if you have rooms in your house, especially if you have an older house, you're not going to have a lot of network drops that are going to be in convenient locations. And so if you just get the, the RJ45 termination cables, they even make like the easy clip-on cables. It's really not that hard to do yourself.
Yeah. I've done it. And you can buy conduit, like the baseboard running conduit that just sticks to the wall and all that sort of thing. I've done all that. Yeah, it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward.
And you can get it all at Home Depot. That's the great thing. It's not like you have to go to a specialty store or even order it off online or something. You just go to Home Depot and you can find it all there.
All right, let's talk about the software end of this, the configuration of things. First, how do I get into my router? How do I access its controls? What are the options here?
That's really going to depend on your router. Most of the time, it's going to give you a 192.168. whatever address that you're going to punch in as soon as you've plugged it up to your modem and everything. And you can
your
get
web
in
browser.
There.
Yeah. Right,
exactly. On whatever computer you have, you're connected up to that. And you're going to have your default password, which you definitely want to change.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's like the first thing you want to do is change your default password.
Because everybody knows what it is. Everybody on the internet knows
exactly.
And they can access your network.
Right. You want to change that. And that's usually how you get to it. A lot of newer router systems, and we can talk about this when we talk about the mesh Wi-Fi, but like Eero and the different systems like that, they'll have an app where you can just pull it up on your phone, and it's really straightforward to connect. So I feel like even in the last 5 or 10 years, it's gotten much, much easier to start configuring your network from scratch to be secure.
Yeah. We didn't really talk about, recommendations for routers, but, I remember back in the days of the Linksys, what is it, the WRT 45, 45G, or I forget whatever it was. But yeah, having to access the web page in order to make any changes, and it could be confusing, and it uses a lot of language and UDP and UPnP and all these things, and the regular user is going to look at that and go, I wash my hands of that. I don't know what any of that is. But you're right, Jack. They've learned that these are now in people's homes for people who are not techies, who don't know the lingo, and they're making it more straightforward. Even like not just the app ones, but even the ones that have web pages. And again, how that works is when you set up your router, you could plug a cable, you could plug an Ethernet cable directly into it. And I think sometimes now you can even, there's still a kind of Wi-Fi, a point-to-point Wi-Fi that you can access. And they give you a number, so you open up your browser, you type it in, 192.168.1. That's an internal, 192.168.1. something is an internal network number. That means whatever's inside the router. There's also 10.10 as well. And you pull up a web page that is being served by the router, and that's where you can do all your configuration. Couple recommendations with the password. So once you change it, write it down on a label and stick it on the in indelible ink that's not going to fade. That's another one I've run into. And stick it on the bottom of the router or on the top or whatever, so that when you need to access the router and the modem, do it to your modem too, because that also has a password, so that it's there. So you're not hunting for it. You're not, what did I change the password to? I mean, obviously you should put it in your password manager as well. So accessing your router, that's where you'll configure it. What kind of configuration do we have to be concerned about in our router? What kind of things should we be thinking of changing?
Mostly it's obviously first two things: change your password, I recommend changing the username too if you can, just because that way if admin's not a user in there, they can't brute force it.
Yep.
But then you want to go through and you want to look at the settings that are related to how people connect. So there's a couple of different choices here, and you have to make the decision on how much work you want to do.
Right.
Because that's really what it comes down to, right? So we can blacklist items, which is to say you pick an item that you don't want to allow on your network, or you can whitelist items. That means that nothing can get on your network unless you specifically said that it can get on your network. And I'm a proponent of the whitelist. I think the whitelist is a great option, especially if you're paying attention to all of the different things that connect. But I use a blacklist personally, just because I have 8 kids with multiple devices, and if anything goes wrong, any burps with them, they are suddenly off the network, and then I have to go figure out which one it is and keep a list of all the numbers. So I advocate whitelist if you can get away with it, but blacklist is easier.
I have like several hundred things on here. We're between all the home kit stuff and printers and iPads and all that sort of stuff. Maybe not several hundred, but close to 100. How do I know, like when you say whitelist versus blacklist, what am I looking at to determine this is allowed on? There's a number, right? That is specific to each device.
MAC address, and it's now don't confuse this with like
it's not
Macintosh.
A computer, not Macintosh, right?
It's an address that it's the physical device address of the particular item that's trying to connect to the network. So if you've ever wondered how, just kind of brief network lingo here, if you ever wondered how you can be on the same network as a bunch of other computers and send a message out and have that message come back to your network and get to your computer, this is basically how it works. Your computer has a unique identifier that when it sends out the information, that identifier gets attached to your information, and then that information packet with your unique identifier gets attached to your IP address, which gets sent out to the foreign place. That place recognizes your IP address and sends back a response with your packet included so that it comes back to your machine specifically.
Right. And it's good to know that the MAC address is like specifically tied to a single piece of hardware, whereas the IP address is something that you can change pretty easily. You can change a MAC address. It's hard. And that's not something you're going to be worried about with normal communications, but your IP address is something that's fluid for the most part.
And usually there's one IP address for your whole network. In a home situation, most generally, you'll have one IP address that applies to the whole, everything that's connecting to your modem.
Right, one range.
Yes. And then Mac is just like a fingerprint. And literally, and ideally, I know that sometimes it's not literally true, but there's sometimes odd things happen and things overlap. But ideally, every single thing that can connect to the internet has a unique MAC address.
Yes.
Like every light bulb, every phone, all 10 billion phones, all individual. So that's the interesting thing to think about. And so so you can blacklist, which is to say anything that isn't on my list here should not be allowed on the network. Only or anything. How does that work?
Nope, so there's other way around.
Okay. All right. Blacklist anything that's not on my list is that's whitelist.
Blacklist is everything can get on except for these things. I don't like this one. I don't like that one. I don't like that one. Whitelist is only these particular things can get on. Okay.
And blacklist is like the default. That's how most systems come set up. Is anything get on as long as they have the password for the Wi-Fi or they have a physical connection through a cable.
And if you notice that your neighbors are, if you're looking at this and you happen to see that there are 8 devices on, and you know for a fact that there are only 7 devices in your house, go check the MAC addresses and then just ban that last one. And when somebody comes from your house to complain to you that they got kicked off, then you can go, oh, well, it must have been that thing. Or nobody ever talks to you about it, and you're like, okay, somebody was on my network and I don't know why.
Yeah, my neighbor was surfing my network.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that there's a lot of newer systems that make the whole whitelisting and blacklisting a lot easier because they give you the specific device names. And with the Eero system from Amazon, I have mine personally set up where I have it on a blacklist, but if a new device joins that has not previously joined the network, it will give me an alert. So I'm not specifically banning anything, but if anything joins that I don't want it to be on there and it's not been on there before, I can block it. So I feel like that's a good middle ground between allowing everything and not only allowing what I specifically set up beforehand.
And we should mention Wi-Fi security. Most routers these days, I would say all routers these days, come set up to be secured with a password, so that you can only get on the Wi-Fi network with a password. And does it matter what you name your network? You see all those funny ones like FBI van and all that sort of silly things. But what do you think? Does it matter what you name it? Should I be obscure so that other people don't know? Like, should I put Bettinelli House on it?
I would not do that.
Okay.
I would be obscure. Be a little obscure with it. And it's because that is one thing that is publicly transmitted. So if someone were malicious against you particularly, and they were driving up and down your street, and they saw, Tranquility, or, that's what the name of my network.
Right.
I'm going to change now that I've said it. but that if they saw that, they wouldn't know that was you. But if they saw your name or your address or something like that, then they would, and that would allow them to be more directed with an attack. There's lots of things that could come from that. So yes, I would be a little obscure with that.
Just do what I do and make it an obscure sci-fi reference from the 70s. No one's going to get it anyways.
There you go. I was trying to think of an obscure one, like something out of Space 1999 or something.
Yeah.
That's a nice 70s sci-fi. All right. Then other considerations, some routers, they still allow you to separate. You have like separate networks because different devices communicate on different radio frequencies, 5 gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz. The newer one is 5. But some home automation stuff still communicates at 2.4. And there's the option to make separate networks. Does it matter, or should I just leave it as is?
Absolutely matters.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example of why. There are still plenty of devices that are modern devices that don't use a 5 gig network. So I would definitely default to 2.4, except in the cases where you have 5 gigahertz items. And then also, if you are using a single router that's servicing your entire house, but you have a 5 gig device on the other side of the house, it is not going to receive as good a signal as on a 2.4 gig network. So you want to, if anything's going to use a 5 gig wireless, it needs to be really close to the device. Because it's great, but it's not
the range is not as good.
Range. Yeah.
Right. And there's a fall off. So as you get further and more things are in the way, the fall off of speed and bandwidth is greater with 5 gigahertz than with 2.4 gigahertz. Mm-hmm. So if you try to use 5 gigahertz on the other side of the house, you're going to get, on a 5 gigahertz device, you're going to get worse bandwidth than if you use the 2.4 gigahertz with a 5 gigahertz device. And there's also something about where the network slows down to the slowest device anyway, right? Is that true? Where the band, the 5 gigahertz, I've heard that.
It can be, but I wouldn't rely on it.
Yeah.
It depends on you can't do anything with your router for that. That's going to depend on the device. And I have a couple of devices that wanted the 5G. If they could find it, they wanted the 5 gig.
Right.
And they could find it, but they were not communicating with it very well.
And I should point out, because it could be confusing, when we talk about 5 gigahertz, that's separate from 5G that like Verizon and that phone. That's not Wi-Fi.
Vaccine.
I was trying so hard not to say it, and then it slipped. I was like, oh man.
No. I would have said it anyway because it is confusing the terminology that they call it. They mean 5th generation, cell phone carrier, not 5 gigahertz. There's two separate things. All right. Other considerations. Port management. Do we have to worry about managing the ports, open ports? I've heard about open ports, and that can let in malware and viruses, right? What do I got to think about here?
I think if you're just having a basic home network and you have your security set up correctly, you don't need to think too hard about that. Obviously, it's going to get more complicated if you're adding in switches and depending on what kind of services you're connecting to. But I think in general, if you're just using a standard router and home modem, you're not going to need to be too worried about that. You need to make sure your antivirus on your computer is set up and your ports on your computer are shut down. But from a network perspective, unless you're doing something more advanced, you don't need to be too worried about the ports on your router.
The default should be fine. Okay.
Yeah, if you are running anything that someone from outside is going to connect to, so if you're planning on running a server, then you do want to be, you want to learn about this. This is something that you really need to pay attention to and work at, especially if you're going to have a pass through. Like I use a website called No IP that allows me to have a website without knowing the static address at my house. So I don't have to pay my ISP extra for a business license so that I get a static IP for my house and everything. And so No IP just kind of assigns it, and checks it and makes sure that it's updated, and then it can pass through. But that means that I have to make sure that my ports are open for that. And that's one area where I do use a whitelist, where only the ports that I need open for that server are open.
So we could set up guest networks sometimes. Is that worthwhile, setting up a guest network?
I honestly think it's more hassle than it's worth. I think you should just be aware enough of your network that the people coming into your house, if they need to access your Wi-Fi, they're going to ask you for the password. You're going to help them set it up. I know most routers and modems have that guest network ability, but it's one more hole that could be poked in your system. So I feel like it's better just to know who's actually connecting to your network rather than setting up some sort of wide open guest network.
Right.
I'll agree with that generally, but I will say that the Orbi mesh network that I have at my house, on the app, I pull up the app, I open up the guest network, it opens it up for 30 minutes to allow people to connect, and then it will ask me after 30 minutes whether or not I want to keep the network open. So it's it's good because it bothers me. I really like the fact that it's going to bother me every once in a while to remind me, hey, this thing's still open.
I think that's probably a good segue into the fact that pretty much anyone I know nowadays, I would recommend a mesh network system to them because it allows so much more granularity of control, and it's just so easy, so you don't even really have to think about it. Like, I just recently set up my mother-in-law with the Eero system, and it's just so much easier. It lets you know when devices are connected. It gives you like a weekly antivirus scan, and it gives you a log of everything that has gone through, and it's just a lot easier to maintain.
Yeah, I agree. I've had an Eero for a bit. I've talked about the Eeros, I think, a pick of the week before, and I had so much trouble getting, to the other side of my house, which is not a very large house, getting good signal. And I finally just went out, got the Eero, and what happens is you have a base station that connects to the modem, and then you have repeaters essentially that are around the house. And devices seamlessly. The technology is amazing. It happens all behind the scenes, and it's amazing engineering. But seamlessly, you move from one to the next as you walk away, and you don't lose your signal, ideally, and all these other things. And it's really amazing, and it's so useful. But even beyond just the ability to extend the network out, the features that they're building into these modern routers of various sorts, I have a profile set up. So all my kids are on a kid's profile so that at a particular time at night, their internet access is off until the morning, and
that's awesome.
And then I can also I can put ad blocking on theirs, at a higher level, and all sorts of content blocking so that I can have for them. I also put all of my smart home stuff on its own profile with certain restrictions as well. And so if I ever get into a situation where something in my home automation has gone wonky, I can just shut the internet off for all home automation, which would be really almost a disaster, but I could. And then, and it's not going to affect my computer and my phone, that sort of stuff. So the features that they have available are really awesome these days.
Right. It's also, I really like with the Eero, how you can look at your network even if you're across the country, because the app is still going to communicate with your specific system. So if you're out of town, you can still make sure that everything is working how it should be on your network and no one is poking in there. Right.
Yep. And if you can't get to access it, your wife has called you and said, I can't get online, and you get access, like, well, that's probably not the Eero. It's probably the internet connection or something along those lines. But yeah. It is really amazing. And you can turn things off. You can access things. You can kick things off the network from anywhere that you have internet access. We've talked about Amazon Sidewalk before, but we should bring it up again. Amazon, which owns Eero, so I'm kind of interested whether there's any backdoor elements of this, but that's a whole nother, we don't know. But if you have an Echo or any other Amazon device, as well as Tile, Ring, the Ring cameras, some other things like that, they are all part of this thing called Amazon Sidewalk, which is it's a kind of mesh network in the sense of it's designed to set up a cloud of internet connectivity for devices, not for people to browse the web, but for devices, so that your neighbors, say your neighbor has a Ring camera on the edge of the property, like between your house and their house, and their Wi-Fi router is just a little too far, but your, say, Echo is fairly close, it will and gives a stronger signal. It'll hang on to that one and get connectivity that way instead of through its own router and that sort of stuff. And that's the idea. Or if a tile tracker walks by the front of your house, it gives its location to tile through your Echoes or your Rings and that sort of stuff. Amazon assures us it's completely private, that there's no way anything could possibly go wrong. But I'll put a link again in this week's show notes, just like I did last week, of how to turn that off in the Alexa app.
And I think the major issue is the fact that they made it opt out and not opt in. They just kind of turned it on. And I believe that they're really banking on most people not even checking that kind of news and just not even thinking to check that.
Right. I turned it off the first time I heard about this months ago. I went in, turned it off so that it was preemptively off before the system went live. And I checked again after the system went live just to make sure, because sometimes, for some strange reason, the switch flips when the system goes live and you have to turn it off again. Not this one, but I've seen it happen with other things. So that's worth double checking. But yes, that's
one of those shadow tactics, right?
Yes, dark patterns.
Dark patterns.
Any other concerns that we need to think about for setting up our home network?
The only other thing I can think of is if you're setting up smart devices that are going to be either outside the home or on the edge of your home, you want to make sure that the security protocols for those are locked down. Like if you have Ring cameras like outside your house, they're going to be connected over Wi-Fi, and that goes back to the Amazon Sidewalk thing. But you want to make sure that everything is set up with those so those don't end up being an inadvertent backdoor into your network. I personally would recommend, if you have anything like that, like security cameras, that you hardwire those in, because they're going to be physically outside of the home. But again, that's also a matter of the difficulty that's involved with that. So just make sure you're aware of what your smart devices are doing if you're placing them outside the home specifically.
Generally, I mean, as long as they have the Wi-Fi password, security set up, I'd almost feel like hanging an Ethernet cable off of the back of one of those would be more of a security hole, wouldn't it? Rather than if they're on Wi-Fi, because then someone just plug the Ethernet cable into a laptop or something.
I think it depends on the device. It's really a case-by-case basis. Because some security cameras are essentially Wi-Fi repeaters if they're connected to other security cameras. There's some Ring devices where you have your Wi-Fi camera and you can get a whole network of those, and it sends the signal out to the other ones. So you want to make sure that you're aware of how that's working before you're setting it up. So just to be thinking about that.
Yes, just know how it works.
Right.
I'll give one tip, one little trick that I learned that's really cool. You have a list of IP addresses internally that you can use for your devices. So if you have a network printer that's giving you problems because you put it on your Wi-Fi and drops the Wi-Fi and whatever, you can actually assign it a static IP. So if you go into the settings on the printer and move through it, just give it a static IP that's a higher number, because generally what you're allotted at your house is about 255 addresses. So if you just think about it, like we were talking about with the 192.168.1, that's the stuff that's owned by the ISP. Those last three digits go from 0 to 255, and you can't touch 0 or 255. So there's a little bit of space in between. But if you pick a number like right in the middle and assign it to your printer, then your printer will have a quote unquote static IP that's probably not ever going to get used by anybody else, and it's not going to interfere with any of the other stuff that's going on, but you'll be able to connect to it from your computer a lot better if you wire it directly into your router.
Yeah, the way it works is, in general, the router is assigning IPs dynamically. Just, here, you take one, take this 32, 44, and it just hands them out like candy. Whereas and those can always change, so your phone might have a different internal IP every day. But like you said, Thomas, if you if you assign a static IP, and it's just a matter of just putting it in there, 192.168.1.145, say, that's going to be its IP, and it won't change, and that can sometimes, like you mentioned, fix access problems.
I would also say, if you're looking at setting static IPs, a good tool to use is the Angry IP Scanner. You put that on your network, and then you put in your range. So, like, if you're on the 192.1.168, you put in 192.1.168.0 to 192.168.1.255, and it will scan every single IP address in that range, and it will tell you what device is on what IP. So you can pick out the specific IPs you want to use and know that they're free.
Oh, awesome. It's a Windows app?
Yeah, it is. So
Okay.
I'll send you the link. We can put that in the show notes.
Awesome. Looks like they're trying to, I just went to their website, looks like they're looking to port it to Mac. So that, it just says it works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. So, but they're looking for help from Mac programmers. So awesome. Cool. That's good one. All right. I think if you have any questions, listeners, if you have any questions about home networking that we could help address in a future episode, please send them to us to technology@sqpn.com. And like I said, we'll talk about routers and modems, the hardware more specifically in the future, and get into that a little bit more. But hopefully this is a good beginning to talk about home networking. Before we move on, I want to talk about our patrons, and I want to thank them for their support. Their support makes it possible for us to create the secrets of technology. And I want to thank our patrons, including Andrew G., Aaron M., John S., Joseph S., and Adam L. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the secrets of technology and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So our headlines. So I love this one. This is one where I'm kind of rooting for the government in this one. The feds. The FBI revealed just recently that they arrested or helped arrest 800 criminals worldwide, and they did this, a global sting operation, because they set up this. It does some details. A company that was making encrypted communications devices on the dark web for criminal enterprises. I mean, this is like out of a movie or a TV show, like 24, you know?
It's super awesome, yeah.
And so all of these criminals, all this time, are using these super secret phone and communication devices that the FBI handed to them, which meant that they could read every single thing they were typing into it. This is kind of cool.
Now, just so you know, they also picked a shill. They got a guy that was like shady but not really awful, and they convinced him that this was a way for him to make money. Like they had an undercover agent convince him this was a way for him to make money. And so right before they closed this case, I have to say this, they told him, you might want to turn yourself in because we're about to do this and you're about to be the most unpopular man in the world.
No kidding. Oh man. Talk about witness protection.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's this is amazing. This is such a cool. I think the two cool things here are, first off, the technology is really neat. Like a look through the technology is really interesting. They were able to gather so much data about stuff that was going on the sly, and it goes to show that, you know, even in highly technical organizations that are using a lot of technology, if they're not running their own cybersecurity operations internally, they're at risk of this kind of stuff happening.
Right.
So you know, if you're interested in criminal enterprise, you might want to put in a resume as a cybersecurity expert because they could probably use it at the moment. But then also the fact that it's so international was really cool, that there were a lot of countries that were capable of running this and keeping it secret the entire time. That was really, really impressive.
Well, that was the most interesting thing about it, is how they were able to keep it secret. And I think it really just shows, like, all these devices that we have, like, people don't realize how much data you are just leaking on a daily basis out of all the devices you own. And this shows, like, what can be traced based on what devices you're using.
Right. So they sold 12,000 devices to 300 criminal syndicates in more than 100 countries over the past 3 years. So basically what happened is there was a Canadian encryption service called Phantom Secure that got shut down because they were criminal enterprise. They were helping criminals. And so the FBI noticed, hey, well, there's space in the market now for this sort of thing. Let's fill it. So they went to one of the guys who used to work for Phantom Secure. That's the guy that we're talking about, and he was the face of their new Anom, it's called. And so they started selling these, and it was a cell phone that had been stripped of all normal functions, and the only working app was a disguised as the calculator. But when you entered a code, you could send messages and photos with end-to-end encryption, except there was a man in the middle who was intercepting all that encrypted stuff. And yeah, it's one of the things that gets me with this story, though, is this, okay, so they've burned their whole thing, right? They can't do this anymore. Or can they?
Well, they can always restart it, right?
Well, I wonder, though, like if they would end up shutting this down, arresting all the guys and shut down the whole thing, if they don't already have something else in the works or working. I wonder.
I'm sure they probably do. There was a lot of talk about why they stopped, because you're getting live information. You can just keep using it to stop crime, right? But what it really ends up happening is that there had to be a warrant attached to this, and the warrant has to be terminal. It can't just be an open permanent warrant for them to surveil, because that would be all sorts of bad for all sorts of reasons.
Yes.
So there had to be a closure to this warrant, and so nobody's saying it directly, but the thought process is that the warrant must have been coming to an end, and so they had to quickly say, okay, well, let's shut down and let's run on the information that we have right now. Let's make all the arrests we can. It'll bust them up enough that maybe we can step in again and do it again somewhere.
Right. Criminals aren't getting any smarter, and they need to talk to each other, and so someone will step into it again, I guess. All right, so that's that story. That's a good one. All right, so another story this week. Last week, you may have noticed that a big chunk of the internet was off, as seems to happen a lot these days. Some big parts of the internet: the New York Times, the Guardian, Twitch, Reddit, British government's homepage. Why not? Well, it turns out it was one of these content delivery networks this one was called Fastly, that had an outage that was not malicious. It wasn't ransomware or virus or hacked or anything like that, or this is what they're saying. What happened was there was a bug in the software, and someone made a change to their server setting, and that triggered the bug, tripped the bug, and that caused everything to go offline for about an hour. And they said we were back up in about an hour, they said. But on the internet, an hour is forever.
It's a long time.
It was a long time. That's a lot of sysadmins and server admins running around with their hair on fire, trying to figure out why their company isn't, on the internet at the moment. But it's interesting, primarily because it shows how fragile things really are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're really codependent on each other, and that there are a lot of these very important pipelines that a lot of the internet sits on. Like there are just a handful of these places that run a huge chunk of the internet, and you take out a couple of these, and a lot of this stuff is going to go offline, and that's concerning.
Yeah, there's redundancy, but there's only so much redundancy.
I hadn't heard of Fastly before, but the fact is you probably haven't heard a lot of these companies.
Yeah. There's reasons you haven't heard of these companies.
Yeah, right.
They don't need to advertise themselves to us.
Yes, we're not the customer. Yeah, and as we see, and when we hear their name, that's usually for something bad.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think the interesting thing here is like the gag is that it was caused by one customer changing a setting. But when you're talking about one customer of this company, you're talking about Reddit or Twitch or the New York Times. It's not like Joe in his his basement apartment in New York. Yeah, no.
Right. And that was the funny thing about the way I've seen this story reported, is that a lot of it has been like one customer changed his setting, and the way that reads is like some dude went on his personal website to his WordPress settings and clicked a checkbox. And it's like that's not really what happened, but it is still interesting to see just these unanticipated things that end up happening. They can knock out a lot more than you think they would.
I went on my AWS and uploaded some of my backup files and took down half the internet. Probably not what happened.
Yeah, no. Well, and I have to say that we do talk about the internet being down for an hour is a big deal, right? These big portions of the internet. But for Fastly to be able to figure out what the problem was and then
Yeah.
deploy a solution within an hour is amazing. Because this is something that they had tested, that they had put out live because it worked in a test environment. And so the guys that they have troubleshooting at their facilities, kudos to you. You deserve a gold star, because this was a really, really impressive recovery.
Definitely.
Yeah.
As someone who has accidentally taken down a company network for half a day, I know what kind of situation that is, and it is not fun to be in.
All right. So here's one. I don't know how concerned we need to be, but it's something to think about. It's a story. Microsoft has warned that there are PDFs online that have malware in them that can steal data from you when you load it. And it's called, it's a technique they call SEO poisoning that is, well, I'm not sure exactly what they're doing, but what they said is the attackers using thousands of PDFs filled with keywords and links. So that's the SEO, search engine optimization, that redirect the unwary across multiple sites toward one that installs malware, right? So they upload a PDF that has thousands of keywords, hoping that search engines will direct people searching for these things to them, and then when they get to that, it will redirect them to a site that downloads malware. I think that's kind of what they're saying. I don't think I'm too far off.
Yeah,
and that's
pretty close.
Solar Marker Jupiter is what they're calling it. But what can we do to protect ourselves from this? I mean, is it just make sure we have good malware protection on our systems, or is there something we can do to prevent being directed to this stuff?
I think it's a twofold thing. I think it's make sure your malware protection is up to date, but also make sure you're not clicking on just random links. Like I guess a good example would be if you're a student and you're looking for your textbook and you don't feel like paying $300 for your textbook, don't click on some random link that you found on the internet 5 pages down in Google, because it's probably not going to be legit.
Right.
Yep.
Right. That's a good one.
Or right at the top of Google. That's the other one to avoid, is that very first 1 or 2 things that return.
Yeah.
Those can be dangerous too.
Yes, that's true. That's true. That people who's gaming the system.
Yeah, and it's also I don't know if this is specifically what's happening with this, but there's a technique that people have used in the past to push malware with PDFs, is that if you put all your text in the same color as the background of your PDF and then have it activated that way, you can't physically see what's going on, but it's going to pull up all that information still, even though you can't visually see it. It's still in the file.
So the thing is to be careful when clicking on .doc or .pdf search results that show up in search results.
Yes.
Make sure they're at least on a site that you recognize, for one thing. Like if it's on a journal like the Lancet, or like one of these big JSTOR or something like that, these research sites where you expect to find PDFs,
right.
That sort of thing.
If it's got a Russian
or Chinese
top level domain, then you should maybe be wary of it. This is kind of similar to the situation you'd run into in the early 2000s, where you'd go on LimeWire to download a song, and if you found the song you wanted and it was 2 kilobytes, you knew that's probably not the song you want.
Right. I would say also be more descriptive with your queries, because Google and really all the search engines now, they're designed to take a query. They're designed to take an actual question. So if you write out a whole question, it's more likely that you're not going to get this kind of cheesed SEO return. You're going to get a legit return that has a lot of hits and has explanations of its information, rather than just 1 or 2 words from it.
I always forget that the search engines have been designed for people who type in, what time is the show going to be at? They literally type that in, as opposed to, a Black Widow movie showtime near me.
Yeah.
You don't have to think like a computer with the search engines.
Yeah.
Just talk to it like it's a person.
I now have to unlearn all of those behaviors I've learned over the past 30 years. And then our last headline, just to mention, we talked about this before, Apple Podcast subscriptions, they're now live. There are some big media companies that are offering podcast subscriptions. And one of the things that I want to mention from the StarQuest point of view is we have no plans at this time to offer subscription podcasts. We have because one of the problems is with this, The subscription means that you can only access the podcast through Apple Podcast app. And we don't want to limit our audience to just people who use the Apple Podcast app. Spotify, Google Play Music, or Google Podcasts, I think it is now. All these other systems, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio. We want you to be able to access our podcast wherever. But also, the prime benefit, it seems to me, for a lot of these podcasts is they have advertising normally. And so the subscription ones strip out the advertising, and they're going to offer you some bonus episodes. Well, we don't do advertising. We sometimes have sponsors that we mention, but they're not ads. And so we are supported by the donations of our patrons. And so that leads me to another thing, which is Apple takes 30% in the first year and 15% for each year afterwards. We do Patreon. Patreon does not take anywhere near that much. So more of your dollar goes to support StarQuest. But also, when you subscribe through Apple Podcasts, your relationship is with Apple, not with us. And we prefer to have a close relationship with our patrons, that this is a symbiotic relationship that we have, not a business one. So, but what do you guys think of this Apple Podcast subscriptions idea?
I'm not a particularly big fan of it, just because I feel like it takes away from the kind of grassroots feel that a lot of podcasts have had. And what the nice thing has been about podcasts over the years is that it isn't this closed off walled garden of you're going to buy all this media, and it's been produced by larger companies. And over the years, we've seen that with, I feel like podcasts have become more and more of a mainstream thing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because you get more content creators out there, but you also get the situation, which is the same thing that's happening with YouTube, where it's less and less individual creators, and it's more these media conglomerates who are gobbling up the space. And so I feel like this pushes podcasts more in that direction of being a professional, closed off kind of thing, rather than people being able to go out there and make their own shows. And the ones that sink or swim are based on their fan bases. Yeah.
One of the things I consistently have to mention to folks, because I'm proud of it, is Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is our most popular show on StarQuest, and we're a network, but we're a very small, like we're really grassroots. I mean, we have one regular employee, me, and everyone else is volunteer, and this is not we're not making big money here, folks. We're getting by, but that's about it. But so Mysterious World is always in between the top 15 and 20 of the Apple Podcast documentary category, and all the other shows around us in that chart are all big company, big media company podcasts. And so the fact is that means, like, you don't have to be a big company in order to be. You just have to produce quality content and deliver to your audience and connect with your audience. And that's what I love about podcasting is it's democratic. It's grassroots. And I would hate to see it really shift toward big publishers, big money, and leave the little guys in the dust.
Yeah. Well, because what you see is the music industry, right? Where there's the same set of chords, the same set of tonalities, the same whatever sells. And then you get into this death spiral of, well, that's what sells, so that we're going to make more of that. Well, obviously, if that's all you're making, that's all that's going to sell.
Right, exactly.
Need to keep it punk rock. But another good thing to remember is a lot of podcast creators and YouTube creators too, the same kind of thing, indie creators, they will also take donations through PayPal, which if you're doing a YouTube live or something like that, it's good to remember that you can donate through PayPal, and the content creator is going to get a larger cut of that than if you're going through a YouTube system or even sometimes a Patreon system. It really depends. But if you're interested in getting the most money possible to the content creator, make sure you're checking out their websites and seeing what different options they have for donation, just so you can get the maximum benefit from that.
Right. That's true. Yes. Listen to the content creator, what works best for them for getting the best bang for the buck. So if anybody has an Apple Podcast subscription that they like, I'd love to hear about it. Who's doing it right? What's interesting? Is it something you'd like to see from StarQuest? And if it is, tell me why we might want to do something different or explore that. But in general, we want to make sure that almost all of our content either right off the bat or eventually is available to everyone, whether you're a patron or not, whether you pay or not. Sometimes we give stuff exclusively early to patrons, but we almost always make it available later to the general audience, because we're not here just to make money. That's not what we're about. We're here to share our faith, to share good content, to create a community, and you can't do that necessarily if you're also more concerned about making a buck, and that's not what we're about. All right, good. Let's move on and talk about our picks of the week. Jack, why don't you tell us your pick this week?
Yeah, my pick this week is a system called the Commander X16, and it's less of a physical product or app you can download at the moment, but it's more of an idea. It's this computer that is currently in development by the 8-Bit guy on YouTube. He's a YouTuber who goes into vintage technology. He focuses a lot on Commodore 64 and systems like that. And essentially what it is an 8-bit computer using the Commodore BASIC programming language, but it's using all modern hardware. So you can replace the system as parts need to be upgraded without having to worry about buying a 35 or 40-year-old system off of eBay and wondering if all the caps have popped or if your chips have gone bad. And it's currently in development. Their goal is to have it be under $99 so you can get into it. The nice thing about it is, and this is something that I've encountered a lot with wanting to get into these vintage systems that I didn't really have the opportunity to play with growing up, is that it is all actual hardware for an 8-bit system. It is not emulation. So like you can buy a Raspberry Pi, or just on your computer, you can download a Commodore 64 emulator and play with the basic code, but it's just not the same as having the actual physical system. And so I would say just check it out. They're taking a lot of support. They're looking for people who have experience in this field to further development. And hopefully sometime later this year or early next year, they'll actually be releasing the system. But if you're interested in vintage computing, it is a really cool project to check out. So that's a Commodore X16 or Commander X16.
And they do point out that while it uses the Commodore BASIC programming language, it runs Commodore BASIC. It's not a C64 emulator. It's
yes,
its own
that is
thing.
correct. It's its own thing, and it's physical hardware. It's not emulation.
That's awesome. I love that people are so creative. That is so cool. And Thomas, what's your pick this week?
All right, so mine's a little bit focused nerdy, but I've been playing a lot of Minecraft lately. A lot of modded Minecraft, I should say, lately. And one of the problems you run into is if you are like me and you have 3 different modded versions of Minecraft that you're running, it can get a little cumbersome to do it. So there's this great program that was written called Multi-MC. And I recommend it for everyone, even if you're not into like modding your Minecraft instance or anything like that, because it gives you a lot of really good backdoor information for, which Java version you're using, how much memory your Minecraft instance is loading up with. It's very intuitive to use, really, really easy. It's basically just a blank screen. You right click on it, you say create an instance, you pick which release of Minecraft you want, or if you have a downloaded mod pack, you just open that mod pack zip file and it loads it up for you, and it takes care of everything. There's nothing you have to do. And if you want to go in and tweak it, you can go in and add more mods to it by just downloading them into that. Inside of Multi-MC, you just go into the instance itself and add stuff to it if you want to. So highly recommend it. It's called Multi-MC. It will replace your standard Minecraft launcher with this whole new bells and whistles system. It's available on everything, so Windows, Linux, and Mac.
Awesome.
Nice.
Cool.
I'll have to use that for the, we've been looking at setting up a modded Stargate Minecraft server for the Secrets of Stargate podcast group.
Nice.
So I have to look at using that for that system.
There you go.
That's cool. Very cool. All right. So my pick this week is another one of my menu bar apps that I like to use. And this one's called Drop Zone 4, which is available in the Mac App Store. You can buy it directly from the programmer, the developer. It's also available as part of SetApp. So if you have a SetApp subscription, you're getting it as part of that as well. And so what it does is it basically drops down a shelf or a little bit of a window or a grid that makes it easier for you to do a bunch of different things. So you can launch applications. You could drop a file, like so you have a file that you want to drag into somewhere into the depths of your hard drive. You can drop it on there, and it sort of holds it there on that shelf. Then you navigate to where you want to go, and you pull it off and put it in the right place. But you can do all kinds of other stuff to it. And I use this every day, so I often have to upload. Well, every day I have to upload podcast files to our content delivery network called Libsyn. That's where our podcast files are served from. And so I have several different drop targets, I guess that you call them, on my drop zone, and they go to different places in our Libsyn servers. So I just drop it on there, boom, it's there on the server. I can do it for FTP, you can do it to Google Drive, Amazon S3, all kinds of places. I can airdrop. I can also like shorten URLs. All I do is copy a URL, hit the drop zone button, click shorten URL. So it's all of these very quick things. There was a upload YouTube video one that was there for a while but stopped working, so I'm not sure if that's ever going to work again, but it was kind of handy for uploading YouTube videos as well. But it's got a whole lot of different things. I use it for just a handful of things, but the things it does very well, and it saves me a bunch of time. And so check it out. Go to their site. I'll have the link in the show notes, and you can see examples of the sorts of things you can do. And that's if you need it, you'll recognize it. If you don't need it, then you won't find anything that it does for you there. But check it out anyway. All right, I think that will do it for us this time. So we'd love to hear your feedback on our discussion. If you have any feedback, any comments, any questions, let us know by going to the show at sqpn.com/technology. or the SQPN Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to technology@sqpn.com. And you'll find links from our discussion and our picks of the week on our show notes at sqpn.com. Remember to like each episode of Secrets of Tech on Facebook, retweet them on Twitter where we're at SQPN, and leave us comments wherever you find us. Until next time, Jack Barazzini, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of technology.
Thanks, Tom.
Thomas Enherho, thank you as well.
It was nice to be here.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Technology on StarQuest.